I'm an associate at the Women in Justice Project, and we are dedicated to ending mass incarceration in the U.S., and we do that by storytelling, advocacy, organizing, and public education. And our guiding principle is that women directly impacted by incarceration have the right to be and should be at the forefront of transforming our criminal justice system. I came to this work through my direct experience of being incarcerated and having to endure the horrific experience of being a mom and being pregnant while incarcerated. I came to jail at 2 months pregnant. Upon coming to jail, I received horrible medical treatment from start to finish. My first experience with medical care was when I went to the outside clinic. I had a urinary tract infection, and they prescribed me antibiotics. I took the antibiotics as instructed. When I went for my follow-up visit in 2 weeks, they told me the urinary tract infection was gone, but I still felt I had it. I later found that I was right, and I actually had the urinary tract infection for my entire pregnancy and afterwards, and it impacted my baby. When I was pregnant, they also didn't give me enough food. They don't give any pregnant woman enough food. I was always hungry, and I lost so much weight. I was 6 months pregnant, and I had dropped down to 120 pounds, and my stomach was sunken in. You couldn't even tell I was pregnant. The pregnancy snack the Department of Corrections give you is a bologna sandwich, which on the outside is advised to stay away from. Treatment by officers for all women, including pregnant women, is horrible. When I was admitted to state prison, I was past my due date, and they don't give you any special accommodations or consideration when doing the intake or any other time. I had to squat, cough, bend, shower, and get processed like everyone else, even while I was having contractions, and I thought my baby would fall out of me at any moment. When I went into labor, I had to wait in the ambulance while the officers and the EMTs argued back and forth because I did not have my prison ID yet. The EMT was arguing that we had to rush me to the hospital because my blood pressure was dropping rapidly. This is a good example of how control trumps everything else in prison. It outweighs reason, health, and safety. Living conditions for pregnant women were unsanitary. There were rodents and bugs, and the temperature was always cold. During a cell check once, I was in so much pain that I wasn't able to move. The officer kept screaming for me to get out my cell so they can toss my cell, and all I could do was lay there and cry. I finally was able to roll over onto the floor and push myself up. Then there is the issue of shackling. I, along with many other women, was shackled throughout my pregnancy. Shackling means handcuff, ankle shackles, waist chain, black box to restrict your movement to your waist. When I was 5 months pregnant, I had to leave the jail to go to court. I was woken up at 5 a.m., I was shackled at 7 a.m., and from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., I was shackled and handcuffed all day. I was uncomfortable, I was in excruciating pain, and no one cared. They didn't unshackle me for the entire 12 hours, not while I was in the holding cell, not in court, not even to use the restroom. Childbirth experience. While giving birth at the hospital, I wasn't allowed to have any support. No family, no friends to be with me during this experience. I had no privacy. I had 2 male officers in the delivery room the whole time. One sat in the corner and the other one stood next to the doctor in between my legs. The doctor and the officers was arguing about whether the officer needed to be there and what role could he have possibly been playing. The doctor was trying to say that he did not need to be there. I remember the doctor saying, "Can she at least have some dignity?" And then the doctor turned to me and said, "What do you think? Do you want the officer there?" I knew I couldn't say anything. I knew if I said no, there would be repercussions for me later. At that point, I just stopped pushing. I was so physically and emotionally drained from the experience and the trauma of having to endure the officer being in the delivery room and arguing with the doctor. Giving birth is scary for anyone, But giving birth while incarcerated comes with additional uncertainties and vulnerabilities because you are literally under surveillance of state control the entire time. The doctor there had to bring my baby into the world at that point. After my daughter was born, I was separated from my daughter and taken to the prison ward in the hospital. Going to the prison ward was so awful. To be in such a grim, terrible environment works directly against the notion of healing. Healing requires a healthy environment, but instead, I was in the prison ward that was gloomy, scary, and dark. It was dirty and it felt unsafe. The nurses assigned to the prison ward were just as bad as the environment because of the perception they had of the patients being there. I was only able to see my daughter twice the entire 2 days I was in the hospital, and when I did, I was shackled in the wheelchair the entire time I was visiting her. I wasn't able to stand up with her. I had the handcuffs, waist chain, and ankle shackles. The only thing they left out was the black box. It was painful and difficult to hold my baby, and those changed on, especially a day after I gave birth. I wanted to breastfeed, but I was denied that right because the officers refused to bring me there often enough to do so. Turns out, the hospital ended up giving her formula that she was allergic to the whole time. After 2 days of being in the prison ward at the hospital, I was released with my daughter back to the prison. I was one of the lucky ones to be accepted into the Bedford Hills Nursery Program, a program for moms and children to be together for up to a year or longer if you're being released within 18 months. I knew that something was wrong with my daughter before we left the hospital, but they brushed me off every chance I said something. I returned to the hospital 5 days later for my daughter's first checkup, and I told the doctor of my concern of her abnormal eye movement. He seemed alarmed when he witnessed exactly what I was talking about, but still, he sent us back to the prison. They kept asking me, was I on drugs while I was pregnant? I told them I wasn't, that they had proof that I wasn't on drugs. They tested me every step of the way during my incarceration while I was pregnant. The next day, the hospital called the prison to let me know that I had to bring my baby back to the hospital because she had a serious infection. Turns out I did have that urinary tract infection the entire time I was pregnant, and because this relatively small issue was not treated properly, it led to complications which impacted my daughter. Unfortunately, these experiences I had are not unique. Nearly 1 in 20 pregnant women are pregnant at their time of arrest, which means that there are thousands of women experiencing incarceration every year. And 2 out of 3 incarcerated women are mothers, which means that over a single year, there are 11 million children who have a parent in prison or jail at some point in time. And of course, reflecting what parents are locked up, parental incarceration has a hugely disproportionate number of children of color. For me, it was a combination of knowing there were so many women going through these horrendous experiences and having those experiences myself that propelled me to become an advocate for these issues. I became a leader in a legislative campaign run by the Women in Justice Project and the Correctional Association of New York, along with many other incarcerated women and reproductive justice organizations, to end shackling of pregnant women in the New York State. And that campaign, which I'll talk more about later, has the most progressive law of banning shackling of incarcerated pregnant women in the country. Shackling is an issue that is dear to my heart, not only because I endured it, but because it's a specific way we can see the prison culture of dehumanization. There is so much abuse that women on the inside suffer, and when you are pregnant, it's the same. There's no exception to the rule. So while shackling pregnant women shocks the conscious, we need to understand that it's only one example of dehumanization and brutality that happens in the criminal justice system on a daily basis. And we also need to recognize that as a society, we allow these barbaric practices to continue to happen because who it's happening to? Women of color, women from low-income communities, people who we don't value in society to begin with before incarceration becomes an issue. Making a better criminal justice system requires us to reimagine the system itself. Right now, we have a system that is driven by only punishment, control, and more punishment. What we need is a criminal justice system. Fundamental values are accountability, transformation, and healing. And changing the system starts with recognizing and supporting the leadership and expertise of directly impacted women through this traumatic situation of being criminalized and dehumanized. The only way for us to really transform the criminal justice system is to have the women who have experienced it at the table making the decision every step of the way. We live in a society that has social and economic conditions which funnel poor people of color into the criminal justice system. These systems and structures which fail people day in, day out include lack of affordable housing, restrictions on public assistance, few livable wages, unfair treatment, education system, inadequate health and mental health care, policing of our communities. And looking at these realities, we see how the criminal justice system is driven by racism and sexism, how the system targets almost exclusively marginalized communities, and how society misuses and overuses criminalization and incarceration as a primary response to social and economic issues. In 2009, a New York State law was passed that banned the practice of shackling women during labor, childbirth, and post-delivery recovery. However, the Correctional Association of New York, as you have heard in this video, did a monitoring and realized that this law was being violated. Working in partnership with the Correctional Association, other formerly incarcerated women who were part of the Coalition for Women Prisoners and Women and Reproductive Justice organizations drafted a new expanded shackling bill, which would strengthen the 2009 law and expand protection to the entire term of pregnancy and 8 weeks postpartum. This bill was introduced to the New York State Assembly and Senate in May 2015. The new bill did the following. It bans shackling throughout the 3 trimesters and 8 weeks postpartum. The new law applies to women who have all pregnancy outcomes, live birth, miscarriages, stillbirths, and abortions. The bill also prohibits correctional personnel from being in the room unless the woman or doctor requests so. It mandates that every single woman entering into the system are notified of their right whether or not they are pregnant. It requires training for all correctional personnel, and it requires public reporting on instances where a pregnant woman is handcuffed in extraordinary circumstances. Some example of our advocacy, led by formerly incarcerated women and their loved ones, included meeting with state legislators in Albany, creating advocacy films like the one we just seen, drafting letters of support, working with the media and reporters, and holding rallies outside the governor's office. At the much advocacy led by women who experienced shackling firsthand, the bill was passed to the New York legislature in June 2015, and it then signed by the governor in December 2015. New York now has the most progressive anti-shackling law in the country, and it's due to the courage of many women who spoke out about their experience and advocated for change. For women who aren't lucky enough to get accepted into nursery, or for women who are not released before their baby turned 1 year old, and for thousands of women who leave their children at home when they enter the prison system, it's important to remember that incarcerated parents face huge challenges maintaining contact with their children, and this is because they are placed at prisons far away from their family who may not be able to make it due to the trip distance or the cost of travel. Because you can only make collect calls from prison, an additional burden on the family. Because visiting protocols and prison visiting rooms are not always most kid and family friendly. And because incarcerated parents are at risk of losing their parental rights if they are not able to maintain a meaningful relationship. Parenting is challenging for anyone, even for those of us in the community. Now imagine you don't live with your children and you are restricted to communicating with them in every aspect of their life, from their school, their health, their emotional and physical well-being, their social life, they're dealing with the trauma of not having their mother, limited and overpriced phone calls, letters which are screened by prison officials, an occasional non-private visit in a crowded, non-friendly visiting room. This is to not say that women in prison don't do everything they can to parent their children and have really strong relationship with their children despite multiple barriers created by prisons. This is especially true for women who are able to work with the amazing programs from the outside to help facilitate visits, the Children's Center at Bedford Hills Prison and the Family Ties program at Albion. We believe that the best way to end dehumanization and improve treatment for incarcerated pregnant women, incarcerated mothers, and incarcerated women in general is to stop incarcerating women. We need to shift away from a criminal justice system driven by perpetual punishment and dehumanization to one rooted in healing, accountability, transformation, and a recognition of each person's inherent dignity and right to reach their full potential.